Hey everybody, this is Perch, and I'm back with Joe Corallo, and actually returning. We talked to him a while ago. Glenn Greenberg, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing very well, very busy, which I'm happy to say, and I'm glad to be back. I've been checking out a lot of your episodes
Oh no, that's a
on
terrible discussion.
YouTube and getting your views on lots of stuff. So
You notice since I moved, I'm more cranky. Would you say it's probably more?
I thought you were more mellow, but okay.
Okay, good. Well, that's Texas Heat's doing something.
Well, you were sick for a while there.
Yeah, near death helps.
But before we really get into everything, we just got the news the other day that Carlos Pacheco had passed away. Really shortly after the news came out that he had ALS. So we just wanted to ask you first, like if any of his work that means anything to you, if you have any stories or anything you want to share.
Well, he was working at Marvel when I was still there, and one of my clearest memories was that he wrapped up the original volume of the Fantastic Four, the original series that went into the 400s when Tom DeFalco was still writing it. He worked on Tom DeFalco's last few issues as the writer of FF. So I remember that. I certainly remember when he started doing Avengers Forever, which I think it began while I was still at Marvel, and I think it wrapped up shortly after I left. So I remember he was working on that. He did another run of FF, I think when Jeff Loeb, I think, was scripting the issues. I always thought he was a fantastic artist. I met him once or twice. As I recall, there was a little bit of a language barrier. But very, very soft-spoken guy, very friendly, very, very gentle, just a nice guy, and a really terrific artist. I mean, his FF stuff, regardless of what I thought of Jeff Loeb's writing, but the art was always just really, really just stellar. And I was very sad to hear that he was ill, and I was shocked but not surprised to hear that he had passed. I mean, it's been a terrible year for legends. Between Neil Adams and the one that hit me the worst was Tom Palmer. Because he was a friend. I consider him a friend, and I hope he considered me a friend. And I spent a lot of time with him, and we talked a lot. And I have a lot of fond memories of him. And George. George was just crushing. George Perez. That was just. I was really hit deep by that. By George and Tom were just really, really devastating for me. I knew them.
It's been a very Kevin O'Neill, Tim Sale. It's been a really, really rough year.
Yeah. Since you brought up Tom Palmer, I feel like compared to a lot of the other people who were mentioned, like Neil and George and even Carlos right now, he hasn't quite, I think, gotten as much love or as many like sort of like retrospectives talking about his stuff. And there might be people listening to this who aren't as familiar, or they know his work, but they don't know they know his work. So what would you say for someone who might not be familiar with Tom's work? Like, what really stands out? What do people have to check out to become converts to someone like Tom?
Tomb of Dracula.
Yeah.
Even though he didn't do every issue in the first year, but once he started regularly on issue number 11, he was there to the very end, issue 70. So you've got this 6 or 7 year run where it's the same writer, the same penciler, Gene Colan, and the same inker, and they made magic, absolute magic. I would say his 1980s run on the Avengers, inking John Buscema, which was beauty, a thing of beauty. And also, which probably isn't held as in high esteem as the other stuff by comic book fans, but I'm not just a comic book fan. I'm also a Star Wars fan. And the years that Tom spent being basically the quarterback, the anchor man of Marvel's Star Wars comic book. So you're talking issue number 49 to issue number 90, 91.
Yeah, I was gonna say went into the 80s at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about 3 or 4 years, and he was inking over Walt Simonson, Ron Frenz, Bob McLeod himself. He penciled some of those issues himself as well. And then they'd have like fill-in artists like David Mazzucchelli, I think, did an issue of Star Wars early in his career. Tony Salmons, Sal Buscema, but Tom was the glue that held it all together. They were going for a very cinematic, realistic style, and Tom is who brought that, no matter who the penciler was. He was also a brilliant colorist. If you look at the issues of Tomb of Dracula that he colored, they stand out. I mean, you really take notice of it. And you're like, oh my gosh, who colored this? This is so beautiful. And it turned out it was Tom.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. Just
incredible talent. Yeah. And he was in that era of Star Wars before everybody was all pissed off about Star Wars too. So that was a good time for all of us.
Yeah.
Well, Glenn, you're a man of opinions. What are some important opinions that you hold about Star Wars?
Oh no.
It's gonna. I'm gonna hate to disappoint you, but I'm pretty easy about Star Wars. I'm not harshly critical unless it's really, really bad. And my opinions probably wouldn't surprise you in the sense that, I didn't think The Phantom Menace was Star Wars at its best. It's one of the weakest movies. But I liked Attack of the Clones. I really liked Revenge of the Sith. I even liked The Last Jedi. I thought it was a daring film that tried to do something different. And I think part of the reason why it got such a backlash was because the fans didn't want to have anything different given to them. They wanted just the same old, same old. And Disney got that message, and that's why we got Rise of Skywalker, which I don't care for. I think it was a very cowardly movie. In terms of the stuff that's going on right now, I'm finding the Mandalorian to be pretty much great. Boba Fett was a little bit of a disappointment. And I'm finding Andor to be absolutely fantastic if you like your Star Wars really mopey.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I'm liking Andor. It did feel like I was having to force watch, like with the eyes pried open, the first episode. There's just something very unpleasant about that, and it did get better. But I wonder how many people jumped out.
Oh, I didn't drop. In fact, I watched the new episode last night, and I found, I'd say, about 75% of it riveting.
Okay.
But then they get into those board meetings with the Imperials plotting out their strategies, and it's like I can't imagine George Lucas would have, he wouldn't have taken the scissors to this scene and cut it down to the barest bones.
That is one of the weirdest edited shows. We'll see how it all plays out, but that is by far some of the strangest plot choices in that show that I've seen in a long time.
So with the Phantom Menace, so for you, you would say it's P-USA.
Oh, okay.
But no,
that's a dad joke there, Joe.
Yeah, but it's from the movie. But anyway, they've done some fan edits of the movie. Have you ever watched some of those? Because I found the fan edits of it are a lot like smoother and easier to watch.
I haven't seen them. I haven't watched them in their entirety, but I've seen enough to say, that this would have helped. I'm probably more critical, Joe, about Star Trek. Just because I've been more intimately involved with Star Trek, having written it for the comics and everything, and having taken some of the things that they've done over the last 20 years or so a bit more personally than Star Wars. Not that there are things that are being done in Star Wars that don't annoy me, but I think I take it a little bit more personally when it happens in Star Trek for some reason. I love them both. I'm one of those fans. I don't prefer one over the other. I don't pit the two against each other. I love them both. I I don't know. I think with Star Trek, I just think there's more of an emotional connection for whatever reason.
Yeah,
Okay,
no, makes sense.
So for something like, Star Trek Discovery, is it a great Star Trek series or the greatest Star Trek series?
Oh boy, that's
No.
I will tell you, I gave up after season 3. So
Wow.
I feel like I gave it a fair chance. I gave it
You
a
really
fair
did.
chance.
It's more than a fair chance.
Yeah, and after season 3, I said, okay, enough of this. But I will tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed the first season of Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
I thought I think it's the best Star Trek since the original. And I don't say that lightly.
Yeah. No,
well, now that we can pretty much speak freely now, because my entire audience has vanished with the positive comments about,
The Last Jedi.
The Last Jedi. So now that they're all gone, let's tell us what we feel. It is a bold choice, by the way, to go in on the movie that basically recreated the O.J. Simpson car chase in space. With a similar result at the end too, actually. But anyway, there you go. Yeah, we'll talk about a bunch of things, comics. But I did want to throw out you have some projects coming out. So not just here to have a good time, which we're having a good time, but you have some projects coming out. And first of all, as I mentioned, you came on before, and a lot of people, your interview actually got a lot of attention, and people really enjoyed it. I think it was because it gave a kind of a different look behind the scenes at Marvel. They'd heard all the hot takes on YouTube, and they've seen the kind of the glowing reports. You gave kind of a different view of it, which was really appreciated. And you're doing some books now that are talking about people in the comic industry. So what's your big project that you have coming soon?
Within the next month, I've got they're called bookazines. I think I described these to you last time I was here. Yes. They're essentially 100-page magazines, but with cardstock covers. So they're a bit more square bound, and they're a bit more prestigious and a bit more put together, a little bit better than a stapled magazine. And they're each one is about a single topic. And so I've done a bunch for Time, special edition Time magazines for about Paul McCartney, Star Wars. Here we go to Star Wars again.
Star Wars, yeah.
I did for just Marvel as a company, the Marvel story, Spider-Man, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Anyway, nice. So this next one is not for Time, but it's the same format, and it's the same editorial team, basically. And me. And it's going to be in celebration of Stan Lee's 100th anniversary of his birth. And so it's the entire Stan Lee story, more or less.
Wow.
But it's broken down into chapters about all of the key characters that Stan co-created for Marvel. So it's not just a history of Stan, it's a history of the birth of the Marvel Universe as we know it today. So each chapter, Stan gets his own chapter, and then the rest of the chapters are for each character. So you get the story of how the Hulk was created, the Fantastic Four, Thor, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and it goes behind the scenes. It's not just it doesn't tell the in continuity origin stories. It tells how the characters were created.
That's a shame, because we've never heard a lot of those stories before. No.
I guess you don't go to the movies a lot.
Who has the time? That sounds awesome, though. Actually, so it's you got a chapter on Stan Lee, and then a chapter of the characters that he created or co-created or stole. I mean, I'm just kidding. No, just kidding. I'm kidding. But we'll get into that in a minute. But we should
get into that. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about that, because that is a major thing that I had to deal with as I was writing. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm actually curious to go there. But okay. So and this is coming out in December.
Yeah.
So this interview will be out before then. But you should go check it out. Where are people going to be able to find it?
I mean, my experience has been you can find them at Barnes and Noble. You'll probably be able to order them through Amazon. You can find them usually in supermarkets and drugstores. If there's a Whole Foods, I think sometimes Whole Foods carries these things. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's been a change of hands at the company that I produced these for. They used to have their own designated website where they would sell their magazines. I have to find out if that's still the case. But for the most part, Amazon and Barnes and Noble tend to be the safest bets.
As I recall, seeing some of your stuff, I know your Star Wars one came out. I think Target and Walmart sold them as well.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, you can find it pretty much anywhere you go then. Mm-hmm. So that's very so tell us more about this book. So you've got the Stan Lee history, you have these characters. You're going to go obviously into his co-creators.
Yeah.
How but tell us some of the things that surprised you as you researched and did this book.
Well, I don't know how surprised I could say I was, because I knew a lot of it going in. Mm-hmm. I think that some of the vitriol.
Okay. Yeah.
And you get the sense, and having written so much about the Beatles as well, and I see a lot of parallels actually, is how
Stanley
so
would have liked that. Yeah.
How so much of the tension and the conflict and the bad heart and the hard feelings could have been avoided had these people simply talked to each other.
Yeah.
Just communicated. It seemed like there was a lot of miscommunication and non-communication, I would say, especially between Kirby and Lee and Kirby, mm-hmm. Where there were hard feelings that didn't necessarily need to exist. And if just one confronted the other and they just talked things out, maybe that's just not what men did back then. These were guys who had lived through World War II. Yeah. And these were tough guys. I mean, these were guys who they didn't really get into their feelings too much, Yeah. And Kirby struck me as a guy who really internalized a lot. Yeah. And would sometimes let it out and literally put his fist through a wall. Mm-hmm. Which probably when you're an artist, it's not a good idea to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably safer. Probably safer to talk to somebody. Yeah. In particular, the guy that's causing you all this grief. But it seemed like the grief was unwittingly caused. I mean, the way Stan looked at it, it was like, well, Jack's busy. I want to do this new Silver Surfer book. I'm going to do it with John Buscema. That might have been all the thought that he gave to it, not knowing that Jack was going to take it really personally and stuff like that. So it was just a shame. It seemed like a lot of this stuff was not done out of malice. It wasn't done to hurt anyone. Ditko is a slightly different story, because Ditko had a very specific view of the world.
Yes, he did.
And I don't know if I think I might have told this story last time, but when I was still an editor at Marvel, and for all I know, I may have been working on Spider-Man at the time, either as a writer or as an editor. And Ditko was at the office, and he was right outside of my office, and I went. Stopped whatever I was doing, and I went outside to meet him, and I introduced myself, and I put out my hand to shake his, and he took my hand, and shaking hands, and I said, "I just want you to know, Mr. Ditko, it is an honor to meet you." And he just kind of looked at me and said, "Why?"
Yeah.
And I froze. I mean, my face just went slack, And I was like, how do you answer that? I mean, if I have to tell him why it's an honor to meet him, how do I put that into words? So as I recall, I just got out of there as quickly as I could. I don't remember if I said anything.
Good call. Yeah.
But that's an odd thing to say to somebody when they say that to you. I mean, you could say thank you. Yeah. You could say, wow, I really appreciate that. But putting me on the spot to say, why is it an honor to meet me? I wasn't expecting to be tested. Yeah. So that's that. I could see how that could be a challenge for Stan to navigate. When you've got Ditko, who sees the world in a very specific way, and if you don't fall into step with that, he resents it.
Right.
And so that's the kind of stuff that I found. And look, and Stan, no, there's always two sides to every story. It's not always black and white. Stan did some stuff that I'm sure warranted the negativity coming at him from the other side. But I would say that there's been a lot of revisionism lately to take away the work that he did and the contributions that he made. And, to the point where, how do you believe, like, for example, with Jack Kirby? Jack Kirby claims that the Hulk was inspired by, he literally saw a car that was flipped over, and he saw the mother lift the car up to rescue the child. And that whole thing about stress and anger, and that's what fueled the Hulk. Well, two things. One, none of that was in the first 6 issues of The Incredible Hulk, the ones that Jack actually worked on. Anger was not the cause of the Hulk.
That's right.
Stress.
Sundown was what
Sundown.
Yeah.
Sundown. And then after like the 3rd or 4th issue, Banner started using a gamma ray projector to trigger the transformation intentionally, because he was turning more into a superhero kind of thing. The whole thing about stress and anger and anxiety causing the transformations, that wasn't until Tales to Astonish. That was when Ditko was working on the strip.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, the incident that Kirby described is beat for beat a scene from the Incredible Hulk TV movie, the first TV movie.
Right.
So we can't really trust everything that Jack says either. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, all of these people, I mean, I feel this is that shades of gray that everybody hates, but it is Stan Lee as somebody who was running a business, and maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but he was a businessman. And part of the goal of getting the company off the ground was to be a businessman at times. And so it feels like there's been a little bit of a attack on him for saying, well, you weren't purely creative. You were leaning into the showman, businessman aspects of the business. But that was required to wasn't it, to do what he did?
Yes, but also keep in mind, I mean, and a lot of this, and I think I get into this in the Story of Marvel book that I did for Time, and I get into it a little bit here. He wasn't the businessman. Stan was not a businessman. He was the creative head of the company.
Gotcha.
Martin Goodman was the businessman. That's
fair. Okay, so I guess I'm using the term too loose. But Stan was a showman.
He was a showman. He was the personality. If you ever see interviews with Jack was not a he wasn't Mr. Peppy. Stan was a character. Stan was the face. He became the face and the personality of the company, and it served the company well, and it served those books well. But if Stan never wrote a word of dialogue, and everybody, I mean, even his biggest detractors will acknowledge he wrote those scripts. Jack didn't know that Stan didn't write the scripts because Jack never read the printed books.
Right.
He didn't see what Stan brought to the table. Ditko did at least acknowledge that Stan wrote the scripts. With Doctor Strange, he wrote the spells and the names of the Oshtor and Vishanti and all that kind of stuff. Ditko is a bit more forthcoming with that kind of credit. But if Stan had written a word of dialogue, he'd still go down as the greatest editor that this industry ever had. And he was the art director too.
Yeah.
He brought so much to the table.
Since you mentioned that and you're talking about Ditko, one thing I'm really curious about is Ditko managed to get that co-plotter credit by, I think it was Amazing Spider-Man 25.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and that was something Jack didn't seem to be able to get Stan to do, certainly not on something as big as Spider-Man and consecutively, because Ditko, I believe, had that credit basically until he was off the book.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. How'd that happen? The differences between the two of them and how Ditko was able to get something like that done.
Well, with Fantastic Four, the credit did change from Stan Lee writer Jack Kirby art, or story by Stan Lee, art by. It did change to by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and it didn't delineate the responsibilities anymore. It was just by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. I guess that was the concession that he made to Kirby. Stan, according to Stan, Jack never came to him and confronted him and made an issue about it the way that Ditko did.
Which
so it might be as simple as that.
I mean, given the men involved, you could believe. I'm with you with something you said earlier, which was Jack Kirby. I mean, admittedly, and this isn't a negative against him, he was not the kind of person who was going to be a touchy-feely, let me tell you about what's bothering me at work kind of guy. So I do find it pretty easy to believe that. And also, by contrast, I think Stan Lee probably did have a bit of the reputation of being a bit oblivious to this stuff, whether his fault or the other's fault. I think he kind of, his mind, he was a extrovert in the sense that he was always looking at some of these other things. So I can very easily see a scenario where Kirby was upset about it but never said anything, and Stan never really noticed he was bothered, and they went on with their lives.
I think that's a very accurate assessment. I think also you take into account that Jack felt that his work was going to, that the work was enough, that he was going to be acknowledged and rewarded for all of the work that he was turning in, and that and you had Martin Goodman apparently assuring him of that. We'll take care of you, Jack. We're going to take care of you. That there were royalties that were promised. And when Goodman decided to sell the company in '68, all of a sudden that promise went away. And so that's really on the business end of things. That's who Jack was dealing with, not Stan. Stan was the creative head. He wasn't the business head.
All right, so we found a new enemy to go after here.
Martin Goodman.
There you go. That's the person. We're going to do some hate videos on that. No, I think it's an interesting kind of story about how two very different personalities. We've seen in the years that have followed. You see kind of the battles Alan Moore has had with DC, and kind of these different personalities that feel not the same, but I mean, this starts to, there's a pattern here that kind of emerges around a company who's doing things for business, a creative head that may be geared a certain way, an artist that's geared a certain way, and them all kind of missing each other. And then we get the scenario we have.
Well, I look at it as a real case by case basis, because I'm working on a book now that I don't know if I can say anything about, but it also is about, it's related to the history of the comic book industry, one character in particular, and that history, and so forth. And some things were done, again, not out of malice, but out of selfishness, out of greed. And there are bad guys involved, and even there, it's about perspective, because nobody really sees themselves as a bad guy.
Right.
And even the worst person in the world, someone who's like demonstrably evil, will not, first of all, not see themselves as that way, and then would also feel justified, completely justified in what they're doing. In the case of Stan, and I see Stan being lumped in with Bob Kane, and so that's what I mean by a case basis. Where people
this is going to be a good point. Yeah,
people just equate Stan with Bob Kane. I think that's extremely unfair. I think that Bob Kane really was egregious in his cheating of, well, obviously Bill Finger. I think that was just knowing. I think he was well aware of what he was doing. It was intentional. I don't apply that same application to Stan. I just don't. Stan never had ownership of those characters. Stan was making a paycheck just as much as anybody else. Granted, he earned more because he was on staff.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, and I don't remember if I got into this in the book just because there was no room for it. Stan wanted to bring Jack on staff.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah. Stan wanted Jack to come on board as Marvel's art director. And so that way Jack would have the steady paycheck and he would be a salaried employee, not a freelancer. And so he would be kind of in the same category, the same boat as Stan. And he would have that steady paycheck and would be a permanent employee. And for whatever reason, either Jack turned it down or the timing didn't work out because Jack was moving to California. It didn't work. But that to me shows that Stan had the intentions that were good. Yeah. Whereas Bob Kane waited until, 1989, 1990 with that biography. He said, yeah, boy, I look back now and yeah, it was a shame that I didn't give Bill Finger more credit. The guy was dead for 15 years at that point.
Absolutely. No, that was mistakes were made kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
This is fascinating. I love, right now we talk about, freelancers and independent contractors and the issues with that and people on staff and everything else. But in that time period, that probably would have been an even bigger deal to actually get a Jack Kirby on staff. Mm-hmm. Than today. The business model works the way it works, but that would be a huge deal back then to make that happen.
Well, eventually Marvel got John Romita as the art director, and think of the incredible job that he did.
True.
But even Romita bows to Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby is Marvel's art director, applying his vision and his. It would have been. It would have been terrific. And Stan wanted him on board as his partner, as his creative partner.
Yeah.
Do you think, has there been a shift with Stan? Because Stan Lee, this is the part that I guess kind of troubles me, and maybe it kind of links along with this cloud of kind of dissatisfaction that sometimes sits over comics, is that for a long time, and most of the time Stan Lee was alive, the feelings, yes, there are things going on in the industry. There are definitely people who are taking Kirby or Stan Lee's side and everything else. But from the general customer perspective, Stan Lee was like the father and the grandfather of comics. He was the friendly face, and we liked him. And yeah, some things may have happened, but they kind of revered him. And then you mentioned it earlier. It feels like there's been an attempt to kind of downgrade Stan Lee. And I guess the thing I always come back to is for what end? Why? Like, especially in his passing, Jack Kirby has passed, Steve Ditko has passed. What is there to gain by wanting to tarnish Stan Lee's legacy? It doesn't seem to benefit anyone at this point.
For the same thing, the reason why they wanted to tear down John Lennon's legacy after he died, that Albert Goldman book that tore him apart. It's because now Stan is this icon. Now there's an overused word if I ever heard one lately, but he is an icon. He's the smiling Stan, and he's entered legendary status at this point, especially with his death. And what's the one thing that you do when you've got this image? You try to tear it down. You try to tell the real story. The fact of the matter is, I think Stan would be the first one to tell you there's not that much there. There's not that much of a story to tell, other than, there was a quote, and I think we used it in my book that's coming out. He thinks his superpower was luck. He felt like he was very, very lucky, just a very lucky guy, and that's all. That's all there is to. That's how he sums himself up, as just a lucky guy, and there's just this tendency. I also think that the comic book community is conditioned to think of things in black and white, and to think of good guys and bad guys.
I have never noticed such a thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but the thing is, the trend towards this, I remember it starting in around 86, 87, when Kirby couldn't get his artwork back from Marvel. Yeah. And Stan was taking a lot of blame for it. And I was 16 years old. I was about 6 or 7 years away from being in the comic book industry. So I didn't I wasn't tapped into the inner workings. But at 16 years old, I said, Stan's out in California. He has nothing to do with the comic books anymore. Why are people blaming him?
Mm-hmm.
But people were blaming him. People were blaming Jim Shooter, making him out to be. He didn't have the power either to give Kirby back his artwork. That was several pay grades above even Jim Shooter.
Yeah.
The Comics Journal, and this was when I was at Marvel. This was like around the midway point when I was working at Marvel. The Comics Journal did an entire issue that was devoted to just tearing Stan apart.
Yeah.
They had a cover of him like as a carnival barker.
Yep.
And it got pretty brutal, just brutal. And that's where I saw it really hit home. So it wasn't even until after his death that all of this started. I just think that people like to break everything down into the simplest terms, and they don't want to do any kind of real reading comprehension or any kind of substantial research into the matter. They just want a very superficial boom, 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 boom. Oh, Stan screwed this guy and Stan screwed that guy, and they were angels, and they never. It doesn't work that way.
It's like they just kind of tear down the past for no good reason, like in The Last Jedi.
Yeah, kill it. You have to.
Did I strike a nerve?
No,
not with me, but definitely some of the people who comment on this. No. I love this. I think that it's a shame because I do think that for all of the faults, and there were certainly some of them, Stan Lee was this inspirational force for whatever, as he transcended into kind of icon, that overused word. Mm-hmm. He was this smiling, hey guys, come and get a comic. And he was a voice on the cartoons, and he was in the Marvel movies, and there's this presence to him that was sometimes cheesy, but often positive. And this attempt to kind of rewrite that legacy, I just keep coming back. It feels like all negative. When all is said and done, all it does is hurt the thing, more. It hurts the comics, I think, more than Stan in a strange way.
And to piggyback on what you're saying too, there was, I believe, also, what was that book, True Believer, or something like that, last year?
Is that the one by Abraham Reisman?
Yeah.
I look, I mean, the fact of the matter, I had my issues with it, but when you've got Roy Thomas coming out against it, and you've got people that guy interviewed saying that they were either misquoted or what they said, or the stuff that they saw, the stuff that they showed this guy were mischaracterized. And I'm talking about Larry Lieber, Stan Lee's brother, who said that stuff that he told the author, again, I think his name was Abraham Reisman, stuff that he told Reisman was mischaracterized by Reisman, that his apartment was described, he basically described Larry Lieber as like living in a hovel practically. And apparently Larry Lieber's got a pretty nice apartment, It was just a mischaracterization. The guy had an angle. The guy had an angle that he wanted to stick with. And no facts and no reality was going to get in his way.
Roy Thomas, just as an aside, I mean, of people in comics that are some of the nicer people. I mean, like Roy is a guy that feels like you have to do a lot to get that guy pissed off, and he was pretty pissed off. I mean, I think Roy would forgive you if you kicked a puppy in front of him. He was mad. I remember that whole thing coming out.
I read it. I was hanging on to every word. I was so glad that he did that. I mean, look, I mean, here's the thing. Nobody would say that Stan was an angel. Right. And did Stan take more credit than he was due? Sure. Did he try to minimize the contributions of, say, Kirby and Ditko to elevate his own? Sure, he did. Did he try to cheat them? Did he try to deprive them? I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go. I think that he probably stepped on their shoulders to elevate himself, and didn't give them all the credit that they were due. On the same token, I genuinely believe that he didn't realize what he was doing, because to this day, I mean, Mark Evanier has said many times that Stan would come to him and say, "Why was Jack mad at me? Why was Jack mad at me?"
Yeah. We live in this world now where I mean there is such a thing as the guy did bad things that didn't make him an evil person.
Mm-hmm.
He, we many of us work in businesses all the time where people play politics and they put themselves forward and all this kind of stuff. You don't characterize them as Hitler for doing that. Well, maybe you do on Twitter. I don't know, but there's got to be some gradation there of somebody who was thinking about themselves first at a business, but was not outwardly trying to send Kirby into the alley. And that's how Stan Lee is often portrayed, as somebody who's like not just taking the credit, but actually wanting him to starve. And it's that it doesn't give either person any credit.
And I have no patience for people who see it that way. I just like, I'm not going to change their mind. So it doesn't even pay to have that conversation with them.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, something more positive than people do spend a lot of time talking about the relationship with Jack and Ditko, because I think they find it more, exciting. There's more controversy or whatever. What was it about John Romita Sr. that, just worked so much, like just was a better fit for Stan, seemingly?
I think because John, and this is not, I want to make it abundantly clear. This is not to slight or impugn Kirby or Ditko in any way. I just think that John Romita didn't come at it with an ego. And that was the biggest difference. John, and I knew John. I worked with John. I love John Romita. I worship the ground that this man walks on. This man was so humble and so hard on himself, critical of himself. And I just think that he came into it well aware that Stan was the boss, because he didn't come up with Stan. That's the other thing you have to remember is,
that's true. Yeah.
Kirby, and again, you can make this kind of Beatles parallel, because I've basically been living with the Beatles for 2 years because I've been writing so much about them. Kirby was a professional, an established professional at the company that became Marvel when Stan Lee first came to the company at 17. Right. And I don't think Kirby ever stopped seeing Stan as that 17-year-old who used to, fill his inkwells and pick up his lunch orders.
Mm-hmm.
The same way Paul McCartney and George Harrison used to be, best of friends, and Paul brings George into the Beatles, and then Paul sort of gets elevated to equal footing with John, and never stopped seeing George as the little friend that he brought into the Beatles,
Right.
And that caused a lot of friction. So I think that there was a lot of that involved. I think probably to this, I don't know as much about the relationship between Ditko and Stan, but certainly Kirby had a bit of a chip on his shoulder because there was that age difference and that experiential difference. Mm-hmm. With Romita came in to the situation, and Stan was already the boss. And
right.
So the dynamic was a little bit different there. But also John was really hard on himself. He and he always, for the first year or two that he was working on Amazing Spider-Man, he thought he was the fill-in artist. He was waiting for Ditko to come back because it seemed unthinkable that Ditko wouldn't come back to this successful character that he had co-created.
Right.
And so he didn't have an ego about it because he felt like he was the fill-in guy. And I think that contributed a bit to a smoother working relationship with Romita.
It's incredibly common, and this isn't comics. This is any work where you have a professional office and you have people that enter the company at the same time, or even one person before the other, and then just one person is better at the corporate environment for whatever it fits their personality better, and they rise and they get promoted and they go places, and it strains friendships. That's not a new story.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
But all this said. Kirby, just to kind of echo what you said, Kirby is still regardless of all this, regardless if Stan Lee did 10%, 5%, or 90%, Kirby is a artistic god and a legend.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody disputes that. So to me, I feel like this argument often gets into a weird place where we can argue about who created what. At the end of the day, Kirby was still the genius that Kirby was. Stan Lee obviously contributed these characters. I feels like a lot of energy, but it's like a comic store talk where we can argue about anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But speaking of Jack too, I feel like and I think these kind of things have got brought up, but people always talk about Stan and Jack on Fantastic Four, Stan and Steve on Amazing Spider-Man, but like it seems like one of the more underrated Silver Age books that Stan and Jack worked on was Thor.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that gets overlooked constantly. When people are talking about like the high points of the Silver Age, and I wasn't sure what your thoughts were on Thor. Since I imagine that's a character you went into in this book.
Oh, sure. Thor has his own chapter, and that's one of the things where I did a lot of learning. I mean, when you asked before, what did I learn? Because I was never really much of a Thor fan.
Sure.
My knowledge of it is somewhat limited, and it was just the series that I never really read until I was working on it back in my Marvel days. But again, the dispute that came up between Kirby and Lee in terms of the create, who created it. Stan said for years and years and years it was his idea to turn Thor into a comic book character, and that he brought the idea to Kirby. And he gave Kirby all of the lion's share of the credit for the design and a lot of the particulars and all that. Kirby took sole credit. Kirby just did not include Stan as in any part of the creative process. So that I thought was pretty interesting. But I think Stan makes a pretty good case in the sense that he goes, I don't know why Jack said all of that stuff. He goes, look, I'm the one who came up with the idea of making Thor a comic book hero. If that's not being the creator, I don't know what is.
I see. Yep.
And that seems genuine to me. You may dispute the definition of what creator means, but I don't think it was coming from a necessarily bad place in terms of the way he saw it. He saw himself as the guy he gave Kirby incredible credit for all the stuff that Kirby brought to the series. But he felt that he was the initiator of it because that was his idea to do Thor. But Kirby thinks it was his idea. How do you resolve this unless you had a camera filming them sitting down to talk about what their next project was going to be together? You can't. So you just have to say it's a co-creation.
Yeah. And I still get to the, I don't know. I mean, and this is my personality and this isn't how other people are, but at the end of the day, I don't think, I mean, if I can completely see a scenario where Stan Lee comes in and goes, hey, why don't we make a god a superhero? Let's do Thor. He's exciting. He's the god of thunder and everybody likes thunder. You can see Stan Lee kind of excited about that. And you can also see Jack Kirby hearing those couple sentences and going away to a desk and sketching some things out, and up comes a character. And you could see both men walking away from that going, yeah, we created this. I mean, in that view. But again, at the end of the day, if you're Kirby, obviously his handiwork was all over this character, and you saw the image and everything. It looks amazing. The character stood the test of time. I don't know. Maybe I'm just wrong about this. I don't know how much it matters at the end of the day, given that both people were so influential about the character. Do we need to understand who created what percentage of the character?
No.
When you're here. I don't know.
I'm sorry to keep bringing up the Beatles, but there's an author who wrote a book where he tried to attribute percentages of
That's
who
crazy.
wrote what of the songs. And needless to say, that book is not in my collection because I find that to be, first of all, boring as hell.
Yes.
Yeah.
And second of all, how do you quantify that? I mean, it's once you start breaking stuff down into mathematical terms on a creative project and a creative venture, my mind just shuts down. I don't want to hear it. And so it's and that's one of the points that I do make in the book. And I say, suffice it to say, whatever Kirby, whatever Lee says, suffice to say, they co-created the Fantastic Four. They co-created Thor. It's the only way. It's the only way you can do this without driving yourself crazy.
Sure. And since we're talking about you mentioned the Beatles. I did just have one question related to the Beatles. I thought I'd run by you. Favorite Yoko Ono album?
You telegraphed the sarcasm there, Joe.
Well, my favorite Yoko Ono album. She hasn't recorded it yet.
There you go. Very diplomatic. I know she's not for everybody. I enjoy the Plastic Ono Band for what it's worth. It's a completely different thing, and there's no reason why people that enjoy the Beatles would necessarily ever like that. But yes, it's. But
I enjoy her move into activism where nobody listens.
But no, it's a slightly more sincere Yoko question. People they're dudes in the exact same way of like the black and white way that people are like, Stan's a monster, like Jax did that. There are people who act like Yoko is 100% this like horrible, awful person that ruined this band that I love, and everyone in the band was perfect and wonderful and great to each other, and it wasn't until this awful person came and is 100% at fault for what happened to the Beatles. And I'm curious what your what your take is on that kind of stuff.
It breaks down into several factors. One was Brian Epstein, their manager, had died in 1967. That left them kind of rudderless. They didn't know how to sort of carry on after that. Paul McCartney tried to step in and give them some kind of direction. The others resented that because they felt like, why is he elevating himself, when Paul saw it as, I'm trying to keep this band together. So again, you've got a lack of communication there, and people just not sort of seeing each other's point of view. So you got that. You've got George Harrison feeling more and more resentful because his stuff isn't being taken seriously. Then you've got John, who's getting hooked on every drug known to man and making some really questionable life choices. And by doing that, he is jeopardizing the band, because if they lose him, that's a core element. And if his judgment is off, or if he's risking his life, I mean, he's putting the whole operation in jeopardy. So you've got that. I'm going to get to Yoko in a second, but I'm trying to sort of like work out all the other stuff that was going on.
You're illustrating the point pretty well.
No, this is great. Yeah.
But then when the question comes up as like, okay, we're in real financial trouble right now because we tried to manage ourselves, and when it comes to business, we're kind of stupid. We're trying to run around. We need a manager. And so the other three, Lennon, Harrison, and Starr, settle on this guy, Alan Klein, who Paul does not want as their manager. Okay. And Alan Klein decides that the best way to get himself in there as the Beatles manager is to divide and conquer. So instead of trying to present himself as a guy who can get along with everybody, including Paul McCartney, he really heightens the conflict, thinking that Paul will knuckle under the pressure. Seriously, that was his strategy.
Wow.
Paul will, once the other three gang up on Paul will crumble. He didn't know Paul. Okay. But anyway, so now you've got this clearer picture. That's all of the gasoline. Okay. That's all of the gasoline. Yoko's presence was the match that kind of, lit the whole thing up. She was a negative presence. I mean, I don't think that's supposition. I don't think it's opinion. I think a case has been pretty well made. She was a negative presence in the Beatles circle. She kept talking at the meetings when you've got three other people saying, why is she talking? She's not a member of this band. And you've got John insisting that she's there. You've got John insisting that she speak for him. It was just, and I think this kind of puts a fine point on it. Linda McCartney was in the mix also. She didn't talk at the meetings, you know. She was there because Paul wanted her there, probably because John was bringing his girlfriend to all this stuff. So Paul was like, well, then why can't I? But there was a key moment, and this was during the Let It Be sessions, and they only showed a piece of it in that Get Back documentary that came out on Disney Plus last year. If you go online, you can hear the actual the full conversation. There was a meeting that went really badly, and George Harrison actually got up and stormed out. The reason being that Yoko was doing all of the talking for John. Okay, Linda. This is after that meeting. They're all talking about it. It was Paul, Linda, Ringo, and one of their business guys. This guy Neil Aspinall. Linda said, I was there and I had no business being there. I should not have been there. But she also, she may have been there, but she didn't talk at the, this was a band meeting. She didn't talk and she didn't, put her opinions forth. She didn't think she had any business being there. That was not Yoko. Yoko felt that she had every business being there and speaking at a business meeting and speaking for John. And that was the real difference. And that was like, what is it? Putting the burr in the saddle kind of thing. So she didn't break up the Beatles. She, doesn't get 100% of the blame, but she was an important contributing factor. But quite frankly, there wasn't much they could do. What were they going to do? Tell John it's her or us? They knew that John would quit if they gave him that kind of ultimatum.
Sure. So ultimately, though, then it becomes Yoko's this negative force. But at what point is John more of the problem for not being the one to be like, hey, this isn't working. I'm jeopardizing the band.
Well, Paul would be the first one today because I think he feels a little bit more liberated to talk more freely about it. Paul would be the first one to agree with you and say, at what point? I mean, this was John. This was John's doing. Yeah. John allowed this to happen. I think I'm playing armchair psychologist here.
Sure.
I think to some extent John was very passive aggressively trying to break up the band.
Yeah.
I think he didn't want to be the one to pull the trigger. I don't think he wanted to be the one to be blatantly blamed for it, but he would keep on throwing these situations up, hoping that it would, cause the big breakup. I think that a lot of the stuff he was doing was very self-destructive, in terms of the band. And that was what Paul was referring to. And I don't know how well you know Paul's solo music, but there's a song by him, called, Too Many People. And there's a line
on the nose there.
Yeah. There's a line in that song where he says, you took your lucky break and broke it in two. And that was aimed at John. Paul's admitted as much. So that's, he would agree with you.
So basically what we're learned is Yoko Ono, the Kathleen Kennedy of the Beatles.
Well, I got it. I think.
What an eye roll from Joe there. My
goodness. I've got a lot of respect for Kathleen Kennedy.
Sure. Oh, there goes the rest of my audience.
I've got a lot of respect for her. Look at her track record. I mean, she's worked on some of the greatest films of all time. Oh, yeah. I certainly have more respect for her than I do for Yoko Ono. Okay,
there we go. We got him back.
I think we just united everyone.
There we go. Yeah, somehow brought the internet together. Yeah. So one of the reasons we talked about the Beatles, but you do have the book with Stan Lee coming out in a month, but you have a book about the Beatles coming out next year. Is that right? Early next year. This is my this is going to be my third Beatles book, and I just was asked to do a fourth. So, so it's been a hell of a ride. It's called The Book of Beatles Trivia. Okay.
And it is it's not a quiz book. It's not like multiple choice, but it's like a question and answer kind of thing. There's
cool.
9 chapters and 9 questions in each chapter, and it asks the question and then it provides the answer. And not just the answer, it gives what I hope is a full enough answer with a lot of context and a lot of facts and figures.
Sorry, I'm joking. I'm
sorry. I know this is not a world anymore that likes context.
Context and nuance,
or nuance. Yeah.
Goodness.
But
okay.
It's aimed at people who maybe know a little bit about the Beatles, but don't know. They want to do a little bit of a deeper dive, but to sort of appeal to some of the hardcore fans. I try to get a little bit obscure also, so you'll know why there's a connection between the Beatles and a really bad horror musical from the 1970s called Son of Dracula.
Okay.
So I think that's pretty obscure.
I'm anxious to read that. I think that'll be pretty. And then if you do that 4th book, you can appeal to kind of 2022 sensibilities. You can call it like the fall of John the Chad, that bitch Yoko. That could be the title. And then you pull everybody in, make millions of dollars, have somebody sue you. It'll be perfect.
Yeah. To bring it back to comics, though.
Please do.
One thing, while we have you here, and we know, you love Spider-Man. You've written about Spider-Man. There's a chapter in this thing about Stan Lee on Spider-Man. So, who would you say, after Ditko and Romita, because I would never make someone have to choose between those two. After them, who would you say is the most, or one of the most, in your opinion, underrated Spider-Man artists?
Ooh, okay.
Okay, I didn't think you were going there. Okay,
yeah, put a curveball in there. Okay,
underrated. Oh,
Underrated.
That's easy. Ron Friends.
Okay,
nice.
He's one of the best, but he's also one of the most underrated, because I think that most people, if you ask them who are your top 5, they will say Ditko, John Romita Sr., Todd McFarlane, John Romita Jr., and either Eric Larson or Mark Bagley. I would put Ron Friends in the top 5. Ron Friends is one of the greatest storytellers that the comic book industry has ever seen.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And his run on Spider-Man, black costume aside, was just a great run. And I love the fact that he starts out doing things in a very sort of Ditko-esque style, but once he got to about 36 or 37 issues in, he starts drawing in a John Romita style, because that's around the time that John Romita got onto Amazing Spider-Man. It's just little things like that, little touches. He's just a terrific artist, and I think he's probably the most underrated. Some people, I think, would probably say, Joe, Ross Andrew.
Yeah, I can see people saying Ross Andrew,
but I think Ron is much better. Nothing against Ross Andrew. Ross Andrew was terrific. I see Ross Andrew more as a DC artist than a Marvel,
like a Wonder Woman artist or something like that,
or like Superman.
Or Superman.
Yeah.
How about Zek? Where would you put Zek in that run for Spider-Man?
See, the thing is Zek only did. I don't think Zek did more than a handful of issues.
Short run, yeah. He didn't do much. Right.
So I have to, I categorize it by people who were on the regular monthly books. I think Zek does a terrific Spider-Man. I hired him to do Spider-Man for me at one point. I think he's terrific, but he's a Captain America artist for sure. Not so much Spider-Man.
He's somebody that I feel like he gets, and it's weird for me. I'm curious if you guys have the same reaction as I do, but he gets forgotten a lot in comics, but he contributed majorly to Marvel, and yet he's rarely one of those people that comes up when you're seeing these retrospectives. Despite the fact, I mean, he did some of the most major stories Marvel had during that time. I don't know, maybe it's just.
I think part of it is that aside from Captain America, he hasn't stayed on anything for very long. He didn't really
no big run. That makes sense.
Yeah, get his roots in, and he kind of I don't know if the phone stopped ringing at his house, or he just stopped, picking up the phone. But I know he was in demand for a very long time. I'm hoping that he's doing whatever he wants to be doing. I don't know why he's kind of fallen off the radar. I'd like to think it was by his choice, and that he's doing stuff that's keeping him very fulfilled. But I think part of it is that he just he didn't stay on anything for very long, except for Captain America.
That's a really good observation. Unfortunately, I think it's more the first than the second. And but I mean, it's hard to tell. But his name comes up along with some of the others these days. It always irks me about the Walt Simonson and Zach, some of these other guys who you get this brand of it's an older style. It won't appeal to today's audience. It always drives me slightly insane. I'm curious to get your take on that. Classic artists. Is this just? I'm trying to think of a fair way to ask this question. Is it fair? Do you think new audiences, new readers would just not go for some of these classic artists, be them, the Kirby, Simonson, Romita, Zex of the world? Would do you think it really doesn't appeal to today's audience?
How many new readers are there?
Oh, okay. That's a good answer.
You just won our audience back.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right, though. It's like, all right, this is killing me because we're having a lot of trouble getting new readers in, and simultaneously we're saying some of these legends who still want to do work don't appeal to this new audience you don't have.
I think that can I express myself freely on this show? That we have to watch our language.
Absolutely, you can. Yeah,
okay.
As much language as you want. I curse all the time.
I think this thing about how the older artists aren't going to appeal to that's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what the audience is yearning for is good stories told well, and that's in many cases in today's books, and maybe that was the case all along. Like we just never noticed. They're not getting that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read a lot of the new stuff lately. I've been picking and choosing very, very sporadically. I'm not all that impressed with what I've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last time that I was on with you guys, I was talking about Immortal Hulk, which I haven't read yet. I did read it. I liked it. I thought it was I would give it like a 90% out of 100. It was a very intriguing series. That would probably be the most recent run that I've read, aside from a little few things here and there. But I think that the art in many cases, and at the risk of sounding like the old man saying "get off my lawn," I think the art is putrid. That I'm seeing in books these days, and that it's both companies.
Sure.
Marvel is as guilty as DC and vice versa. The art looks like it was drawn by 15-year-olds in their loose leaf notebook. These are artists that are not ready for prime time, and yet they're getting high profile gigs. The storytelling is incomprehensible. The style is, these are underground comics. These are independent comics.
Right.
These are not this is not the kind of art that you put in a mainstream comic book where you're trying to get as wide an audience as possible. You are shrinking your audience to such a degree that this is not going to appeal to kids. This is not going to appeal to a parent who's looking for something for their kid to read. They're looking at this. What is this? Stick figures. This is amateurish. Right back on the stand. That's part, you can't even get past the art in most of these books to even see what the stories are like. I will say, again, because I haven't been reading that closely, I'm at least aware of what the criticisms are about a lot of the writing these days. I have to dismiss a lot of it because the people making these criticisms have such a political agenda.
It's true.
So, they may be reading into it stuff that isn't necessarily there. And I have to make my own choices. I have to interpret it my own way. I can't have, anybody else telling me, well, it means this. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, no, I have to read it myself and be able to say that. So I think that's a concern. That's a concern.
I know a lot of these writers. I know Perch does too, but I have had conversations with some of them who have genuinely been flummoxed by the interpretations that people and the things that people take it from it, being like, I wasn't going through that at all. And like genuinely, not like, and that's not for everything that's coming out, but for some of these things, like people are just like, I have no idea how people even read into that or not. Like there is definitely that kind of bias for a lot of it. But speaking of art too, even like if you're looking at like one person, like one of the books coming out now that I think is very good is World's Finest, that Mark Waid's writing over at DC. Yeah. And Dan Mora, I think, as an artist, is a fine artist on that book. But but the thing is, going to exactly the point I'm making, you could change the paper stock and some other things and print that exact art like 30 years ago, and it would more or less fit. You'd have a different color palette or some things like that, but like the line work, it's not this like crazy thing that you couldn't see existing like 30 years ago. And speaking of things existing 30 years ago, you have some people saying like, oh, we can't, like, who's going to want to read something from, like some of these older artists like a Walt Simonson or a Ron Frenz or something like that. Now they had their heyday, and then in the same sentence will be like, and we can't wait to get you Batman by Mark Silvestri. And it's like, it's like, do you guys know how long ago it was? And this is not a knock at Mark. I think Mark's a fantastic artist
not at all.
in his own right. But his height was about 30 years ago now.
It seems to me like Marvel just put out a really high-profile Fantastic Four book by Alex Ross, who, again, you're talking, Marvel's was almost 30 years ago. That's number one. Yeah. And number two, the book is done like it looks like a psychedelic 60s, ultra, realistic 1960s Jack Kirby book, photorealistically brought to life.
Yeah.
Excuse me. you know,
it's all absurd. I think there's so much evidence that, first of all, this argument that old styles can't sell is ridiculous. I like the point you made about Dan Mora, who I think is a great artist. I think he's doing great work. But you are right. You could transport Mora back 40 years ago, and the art would have still fit just fine in that time period.
Here's the thing. I hate to sound cynical, but a lot of these guys who we've talked about, they've been in the business for a long time, and so their page rates reached a certain point. You get some indie guy, who's living from paycheck to paycheck, and is from the independent world. You can get them a lot cheaper, and I think that is a major consideration too.
Absolutely.
I think some of these guys are too high priced, and the industry being where it is right now, they don't want to pay those kinds of fees, page rates.
I'm also curious, based on your time at Marvel. So the other thing that's happened, I've heard this story a lot, is kind of, that's the first half of the story. What you just said is that a lot of these legends, their page rate has risen. Companies don't want to pay it. They stop getting work. Their page rates start to fall. But at that point, the editors and the people involved have new favorites they're working with. And so even though the page rate has come back down, the phone's not ringing because they're no longer in the game. Is there some truth to that, do you think? Or
I couldn't speak to that because I haven't been involved in that area of the industry in a while. I can tell you that I was not a legend in the business. I never reached that kind of status while I was there. But what I can tell you is my page rate when I left Marvel, if I went back to Marvel with for a writing opportunity, and I wanted to basically pick up where I left off, I'd be laughed out of the building.
Wow.
And we're not talking, Mark Waid level, page rate. Or
I understand. You're $10,000 a page rate.
it's just
it feels like a self-fulfilling trap that the industry put itself in. Yeah,
it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And it all goes back to something that Jim Shooter used to say is it all starts with the quality of the books.
Mm-hmm.
Make the books good and the audience will be found. All you have to do is tell good stories. And again, I can't comment too much. I just know what I see on there's a lot of YouTubers out there. And I don't lump you in with all of them with them.
Oh, that's okay. My show sucks. Yeah.
But there's this one guy in particular who just hates his whole lot in life is to just get out on YouTube and just hate everything. Everything's being destroyed and nobody likes it. And everybody and this person they've got this agenda and it's like, I at this point, if I do check out his videos, it's just because I'm so amused that the guy's making an absolute fool of himself because he's just so one note. But he does show some of the artwork to make a point. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I could kind of see that point,
Yeah.
So in terms of the artwork, yes, I can comment, I think, with some degree of authority by seeing the art. I can't comment on the writing itself, whether the dialogue, because I'm a dialogue. I like the dialogue. How is the plot? Does it tell the story? Is there a story? But I think because it's such a visual medium, the art is the first selling point, not the only selling point, but the first selling point. And I think they're falling down in many cases miserably because of the art, and they just need better artists.
But I thought people just buy comics for the covers.
Okay, stop. No, I find I had this argument with who is a current editor at Marvel. Is still a current editor at Marvel, but they're basically talking about, look, we have to appeal to the webtoon audience, and so the art, if you look at kind of a webcomic, fine, it's scratchier, it's looser. But the big flaw in that argument is that this comic that they were pointing to as pulling in this audience, this major audience, is free. Mm-hmm. And it's online, and it's a completely different medium, completely different group you're appealing to.
Sure.
And it's being posted kind of one page at a time. Mm-hmm. It's not even the same thing. It's like comparing an apple to a car. They're completely different elements. They don't translate that way.
The comic book industry and the people in it have a long, proud history of looking to the wrong things and trying to copy and ape the wrong things, and not being able to appreciate what the comic book medium has to offer in and of itself. I know that there was an editor who shall remain nameless at Marvel who didn't want any speed lines or sound effects in any of his books, because when you're watching a movie or you're watching a TV show, you don't see speed lines, you don't see sound effects. Why should they be in a comic book? And I was told this by a freelancer who was working under this editor at the time, and my jaw dropped. This was after I'd left Marvel, and I could not fathom that kind of thinking. Why are you looking to why are you trying to duplicate the TV and movie-going experience in a comic book? If I want to watch TV or I want to see a movie, I'll do that. I'm reading a comic book because a comic book gives me something that those things don't have. Yeah. So I don't understand this. I don't watch webtoons. I don't look at webtoons. So I don't know anything about that. But it sounds to me like, once again, they're looking to the wrong thing and not looking to embrace and enhance and improve the medium that they're working in. They're looking to try to turn it into something else. And it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, there's a long history of, for decades, comics has tried things like, oh, well, let's get, a novelist or an actor or something like that to write comics, because who the hell's going to read a comic by a comic book writer? And like things like that. You just constantly, and every time I can't speak for every one of them, but having talked to multiple people who are novelists who then went into comics, they all tend to say the same thing of, there's not really that much crossover between my prose audience and my comics audience. There's a little overlap, but it's a very small percentage. And for the most part, it's people that like my comics work and people that like, my prose work. And it's like, but that's been the case for decades. And yet we still get you just see the same tricks being tried over and over again. Like there's this level of embarrassment of being involved in comics, and it's like, oh geez, we gotta get people to read our comics. I know, we'll get someone who was in the writer's room of season 2 of a Netflix show,
right?
Because that's more appealing to people than a comic writer. What?
That just
what
sucks.
are you talking about? Like,
yeah, I hate that whole element, and there is this feeling, and maybe it loops back to a little bit to your book, Stan Lee, kind of this desire to change the man and everything else. Comic books are usually at their best when people appear to be proud of working in them,
yes,
and buying them,
yes,
and when you're embarrassed of them and you're embarrassed of your legacy, you're trying to bury parts of it. It turns people off, and that feeling seems to permeate some of the books at times. And I don't see this brought up in a lot of those YouTube videos. Maybe, I know exactly what you're talking about, because there's only one guy on YouTube who criticizes anything. So we all know who you're Perch. I'm kidding. But it is this, there is this negativity that filters over, and not negative. It's this comic books aren't important enough kind of vibe. And that's never been good for comics. Right. And you look at when Jim Shooter was really lean forward, or Stan Lee was in a quote unquote Carnival Barker mode, or whatever it happens to be, is as cheesy as that sometimes came across, it still came across as somebody who actually wanted to be there. And that helps. That
shows you how good an actor Stan was, because for the most part, he didn't want to be there. He wanted to get out.
Sure.
But he was able to embrace it, at least publicly, and try to bring a certain degree of respectability and respect to the medium. Jim Shooter absolutely was very quality conscious, and sometimes to his detriment, but his heart was certainly in the right place, and we need more people like him. Maybe maybe people who can navigate the politics and the social aspects of it a little bit better than he did, but certainly we need his vision, and we need his discipline.
And
I
mean, we need
what's that?
Yeah, I was just going to make a joke. I was going to say, we need his vision, we need his Scarlet Witch, we need his Hawkeye, we need the whole team.
But I mean, I think we need, like, he's just he took it seriously, and he was not afraid to say no. When a creator came to him with a bad idea that he knew wasn't going to work. And that's another thing that I think is missing. I think that the editors have been so neutered in many ways that because they've got a big name on the book, and is there any big names that in comics anymore? I would even question that. But to keep them happy, they just rubber stamp it. And so you get like a lot of, I know it's been a long time, but I never got over that Gwen Stacy, Norman Osborn story. I how did that get approved? How did that go through? How did the Captain America being part of Hydra? How did that even? Number one, how did it get approved? And number two, how did that not get shut down the minute election 2016, where a sizable part of the country was like in a state of shock and horror, and now you've got Marvel's symbol of America is basically a Nazi,
Yeah.
It's like, no, change course as soon as you can. Change that. No, but they dragged it out, and they dragged it out, and they dragged. I read that whole storyline. I was like, they could have ended this 6 months ago,
Sure.
So
Yeah.
he was not afraid to say no, and he was not afraid to, bruise egos. And there needs to be a little bit of that at this point, I think, again, because some of the stuff that's being done with these characters is just not great for the long term.
And to your point, I think there are a lot of interviews, and I'm sure Perch will jump in on this as well. You would be hard pressed to go a week on, social media reading interviews without a creator being like, and I pitched them this idea, and I can't believe they're letting me do this to their characters, and I got to do the craziest thing, and I sent this email, and I thought the editor was going to, fire me and somehow my whole family from their jobs, but they emailed me back saying, this is the best idea, and we're going to let you just decimate our entire legacy. And I was like, I can't believe it, but I'm doing it anyway. Like that seems to be like something that's like a mark of like pride for creators.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that happened or why.
Well, there was somebody at Marvel, I think I remember who it was, but why drag their name in? But
sure,
but when it came to making a really questionable creative decision, he said something to the effect of, it was the idea came up, and I got really uncomfortable with it, and that's how I knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah,
and I just kind of put my head in my hands, and I was like, no, and it turned out it was a storyline that I absolutely despised. And if I was in that editor's place, I would have shut it down in a heartbeat. I get the sentiment that you can't let things get stale, but you also have to preserve. These are your jewels. These are your properties. These are things that are intended to be around after you're gone. You don't break them. You don't break them. You can turn them a little bit. You can do the illusion of change, but once you're done, you put the toy back on the shelf in the shape you found it in.
Yeah.
And that's no longer the case. Everybody wants to put their personal stamp on the stuff that they're working on.
They do, and what's sad about that is that so whatever stamp they put on it, the company and these properties and what they want to do. I mean, these are not unique creative concepts that our author gets to have and do something unique with, and then the story ends. These are designed to be legacy, ongoing, forever characters.
Right.
So the sad part is people are coming on and making these kinds of massive changes, putting broken toys back up on the shelf.
Right.
And putting the company in the position to have to do bizarre gymnastics to get the toy more or less back in the position. But it's going back in the position it kind of is at some point. The difference is the character has been so thoroughly warped in this process that the readers don't believe that it's back in the original state again, because it's had all these dents to the story. So you can't. They're trying to kind of just make it all way it always has been, but with enough damage, there's no way to go back. Even if you completely retcon, it was all a dream, forget about those issues ever happening.
Right.
Yeah, and you also can't just say forget this run happened. It's a collector medium. So you can't just say forget the last 100 issues. That goes against your entire audience. I
mean, I used to think that way. Now I'm more than happy to dump runs from my memory that I there are runs of the Hulk that I just blank. As long as they don't refer to them, I don't want to think about them. Runs of Spider-Man. But with things like with DC is doing right now with Batman, with Superman, I don't see how you backtrack from that to get those characters back to where at least I think they should be. I don't think Superman should be a parent. I don't think Superman should be, at this point, I don't think he should be married. I don't think Batman should have a son with Talia. I again, call me old school. I'll take my lumps for that. But I think that those characters, for just as two examples, are so far away from the core. But suppose you do try to get them back to basics. You're going to, if you get Superman back to being young and single, well, you're going to upset an entire very vocal community that has latched onto his adult. I don't even, is he gay or bisexual son or
supposed to be bisexual. Jonathan.
Okay,
who knows? Yeah.
Well, now you've got this element there. If you take him away, which you would have to do to get back to pure Superman, you're going to get accusations of, well, now you're being you're being homophobic, or you're being
you're erasing an identity there, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And what do? How do you? But I do think in the long run, aging Superman to this point where he's now literally the parent of an adult child, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. But then you also you get rid of the I'm blanking on her name at the moment, but the lesbian cop from John Byrne's run,
Maggie Sawyer.
Yeah. Who was in the book? Yeah, was a supporting character for a while after. Like, where the hell's she been for a while? And no one seems to be upset that she's.
Well, nobody cares about Maggie Sawyer, Joe. Come on.
Yeah, but I mean, she's not a headliner of her own.
No.
Your point is right. People erase things all the time, but the only solution here is you send them off to Earth 7, and then you get a new one.
But really though, the one of the problems, and it's a Marvel problem too, but it's historically been more of a DC problem, especially the past couple of decades or so, is exactly to like Glenn's point. It's like, but they keep doing these crises and wiping things out. So like, okay, we're going to wipe the slate clean, but oh man, okay, but Dick Grayson's still going to be Nightwing, but we're going to say he was Robin at some point because that's important to his backstory.
Yeah.
And then, Red Hood we made, but Jason being a Robin that got killed, we have to keep that. And then Tim Drake's Batman is Robin because people like Tim Drake, but we can't get rid of Damian because there's Damian fans. So let's have
that's
Tim
the other
Drake
problem.
And Damian.
That's the other problem. Yeah. I mean, I hate.
It's a workable
I hate the concept of Damian Wayne. I hate the character of Damian Wayne. I haven't read Batman in about almost 10 years now because when they did the New 52 and I saw they were keeping all that stuff, I washed my hands of Batman after a lifetime of reading it. But again, you get to this point where Batman has a kid. It's just like it just doesn't work for me. And if they ever adopted my way of thinking, well, now Damian has all of these fans. You can't go back. And so what do? Is this now the status quo, or do you keep going forward to the point where at some point Superman's son is his name John Kent? Does he now become Superman and you age Superman out? Now you're one step removed from the core concept.
Right.
Because
But he's Superboy kind of now, but he's also Superman. But then also Connor Kent's back, so there's another Superboy.
Yeah, well,
and then it just gets bloated. And then there's like 3 Wonder Girls right now because Donna Troy's still around.
350, one of those. Let me
Cassie Sandstark's still around. They introduced the Brazilian Wonder Girl,
Yara Flor, the one with
Yara Flor. Yeah. So there's 3 Wonder Girls and like 3, but they brought Nubia back. So you have Diana Wonder Woman, Nubia Wonder Woman, and you also have Artemis Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
because they're using her again. So you have like 3 Wonder Woman and 3 Wonder Girls with your 2 Super Boys, and they're bringing Power Girl back too. So you have Supergirl and Power Girl on the same Earth. And Superman.
With all these families, it's like the entire DC office are filled with Mormons. No, okay, sorry. Okay, wait a minute. So what if, though, you don't like Damian, but let me try you on this. What if it was revealed that Batman had actually secretly sired every single child in Gotham? And it was called City of Bruce. Okay.
It would make more sense than some of the stuff.
It would make
sure.
a lot more sense than the bullshit you were just explaining there, Joe.
No, but also with Robin, because don't forget, I think it was during the New 52, at some point, they also said that Carrie Kelly was also actually a Robin. Like, they brought her into, like, the present day?
Yeah.
To also be Robin, and then they were also like, well, Stephanie Brown's around, and she's spoiler now, but she was still also Robin at one point.
Don't forget about Cassandra.
Yeah. Well, she's like a Batgirl, right?
So what you're telling me, Joe, is it was a good thing that I stopped reading DC 10 years ago.
Yeah. Good
well,
choice.
there are, to anyone from DC listening, there are wonderful DC products available, every week. And some of them are World's Finest by Mark Waid, and there's something else.
You can find them all in DC Infinite, which has different pricing tiers for your reading pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I mean,
are they a sponsor?
No, but there's
not at all.
What's good that they're doing other stuff.
It is.
They have to be.
It is a problem. So you're identifying, though, the big crux of the problem is that you've got existing fans and collectors who would like things kept the way they are, and that's kind of your backbone. It's been the people, and they're still there. They're still buying. So that is a target audience you actually cannot lose, or the bottom's going to drop out. You need those people, and then you're trying to appeal to new audience. And I think the challenge is you're trying to appeal to the new audience in maybe the dumbest ass way possible. And the two are mixing together like peanut butter and oil.
If you're trying to appeal to a new audience, let's go with this theoretical new audience.
Okay.
We're talking about people who haven't read comic books before.
Yes.
They don't know from Damian Wayne, from Jason Todd, from Tim Drake and all that. Mm-hmm. If they're the new readers that we're claiming them to be, or we're assuming them to be at this point, you don't have to worry about, we have to keep things new. We have to keep things.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I that's why I think that thinking is just utterly ridiculous, because changing your Robins or preserving the Damian Wayne Robin, but making him do this instead of that, and aging up John Kent so that now he's an adult instead. New readers, if they are indeed new, this is going to have absolutely no meaning. They're coming in, they will accept whatever you give them. So how about giving them something that is true to the core concept?
Right.
And quite frankly, John Kent is not part of the core concept of Superman. Superman is not a dad. Superman's your older brother. Superman's your friend. He's not your dad.
Mike, man. That I couldn't have said it better.
I believe he's technically your pal, but
that's reserved for Jimmy.
Yeah, only Jimmy gets it.
Because remember in the movie when Lois said, "Who are you?" He didn't say a pal. He said a friend.
That's true.
That's true.
Well, he might have a different idea of what friend means than he's saying to Lois, but
that's true. In Kryptonian, friend means I'm going to fuck you. Sorry.
He's a friend who likes pink panties. We know that.
Yes, he does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Glenn, this has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I look. So to remind people, you have this book in December, Stan Lee. You can find it pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, it's called a 100th Birthday Salute to Stan Lee, subtitled Origins of the Marvel Universe. And that will be out sometime in December. And like I said, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, hopefully your local supermarket or drugstore, Walmart, Target.
Got to find that. This sounds excellent. It sounds like a really well-researched book. We're looking forward to that. And then in the new year, you have a Beatles book that is coming out. Does that have a title?
The Book of Beatles Trivia.
Well, that's right. It's an earlier, an idiot. Yeah.
And later in the year, because I'm working on it right now, is going to be another big bookazine devoted to a specific comic book character. It's going to be along the lines of the Spider-Man book that I did, but for another character. And when I'm allowed to announce it. I'd love to let you guys know, and maybe I'll come back and if you'll have me. And
I'll have you on anytime. I love it. I mean, people are they love the last one. We'll love this one. I think it's great to hear from you. And if you didn't hear the previous interview, you could go see it. It's still up. You could go hear about that. You talked about working at Marvel at the time, editorial, writing, all this really great stuff. Great. So, Glenn, thank you so much. I'm always really, really thankful for the time that the people come on here give us. And Joe wants to say one more thing.
This is all great. Thank you, Glenn. It's always great. I hope we can run to each other again in person soon. And for everyone listening too, you can stream The Phantom Menace on Disney Plus. And
yes, you can.
And the Plastic Ono Band is on Spotify. So you can
if you haven't seen it recently, go back and watch The Last Jedi, and keep in mind the O.J. Simpson car chase while you're watching that movie, and you will be surprised how much the stories align.
Although, also, who doesn't love Laura Dern, though? Really?
Well, sure, why not? I mean, lots of people on this channel, I think, absolutely despise Laura Dern, but fair enough.
Well, they didn't see that first Jurassic Park, though.
Well, okay, yeah, her digging in poop is a moment.
Yeah, that wasn't the scene I was thinking of.
This conversation has taken a very interesting turn.
Yeah. No. I've seen much worse films than The Last Jedi, so I don't know. And there go all my subscribers. Glenn, thank you very much. Wonderful to have you, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, I hope so.